It is cold. Frost covers the ground, and it is quiet, like the world is holding its breath. It's the 2nd of February. It's a few hours after dawn, a strange dawn, because ice crystals in the upper atmosphere had split the sun into 3, so 3 suns had risen in the east over this cold, quiet patch of English countryside. It is February the 2nd, and a few thousand men are standing in a field next to a crossroad, waiting. They are waiting for a few thousand other men to come and try and kill them. The veterans obsessively check the buckles of their armor and roll their axes in their hands, gripping and ungripping, gripping and ungripping, whereas the archers pick up the arrows they have stuck in the ground and reset them, making sure that they are within easy reach. Maybe there's the sound of a lot of men breathing. Maybe there's the sound of a few nervous horses. At least one horse. We know that there was at least one, because the men look up and see their commander ride down the line. He's checking that everything is in place. He's checking that the banners, his banner, is where it needs to be, in the center of the line, where he is going to stand, where he is going to fight, so that everyone can see that he still believes in victory. The commander sitting on that horse is a 19-year-old boy. He is Edward, Earl of March, and it is the 2nd of February, 1461. It is the Battle of Mortimers Cross. And in a few hours, that young 19-year-old boy will be set on a path that will lead him to the bloodiest battle of English history and make him king. So this is my retelling of the Battle of Mortimer's Cross. I do this as a setup to the game where I'm going to, with a group of buddies, we're going to refight the Battle of Mortimer's Cross. Possibly we're also going to try and figure out some of the things that we don't know about Mortimer's Cross. We shall see what happens, whether or not we are any wiser after this war game. The background of Mortimer's Cross is in the split in the Plantagenet family that happened between the House of Lancaster and the House of York. The House of Lancaster had at least one brilliant king in Henry V. Henry V was the warrior king who won at Agincourt and who founded what could have been an English superpower. However, Henry died young. And as such, his very young boy, Henry VI, took over from him at the ripe old age of 1 or 2 years old. So the father of Henry was a famous war hero, but Henry himself was nothing of the sort. Henry was soft, Henry was pliant, Henry was very, very deeply religious. Henry also possibly had some sort of mental disorder. At least he had long periods of time during his reign where he was incapable of making any decisions, of reigning, sometimes even of getting out of bed. So in a period where the country really needed a strong king, someone that could mirror his father, they had the weakest possible king, and a series of unsuited politicians held power in England. One of those politicians, maybe not as unsuited as some of the others, was Richard of York. Richard of York was also of the House Plantagenet and had possibly a better claim than Henry himself, because he was of the line of the House of York, descended from Edmund of York, whereas the House of Lancaster were descendants of John of Gaunt. That aside, when we get to the 1450s, Richard is one of the few people who think that he is capable of running the country. A country where the economy is going to bits, the war in France has ended very badly, and England has lost much, if not all, of its French possessions. Richard was one of the few people who actually could do something. However, he was not very popular with some of the other leading figures, and maybe especially with Henry's wife, Margaret of Anjou. So when we get to the point where this turns into a conflict, a war of the Roses, these two figures, Richard and Margaret, actually become the main leaders of the early War of the Roses. Richard tries to and succeeds in taking control of Henry himself at the First Battle of St. Albans. And that meant that when we get to 1660, Richard actually had the king and could rule as the main advisor of King Henry. Margaret, however, was not having that. She was afraid that Richard would take the throne for himself, and that her son, Edward, would lose his claim to the throne. So when the rest of the Lancastrian cause seemed lost, Margaret was the main political figure that they rallied around. So when we get to 1461 and this one battle at Mortimer's Cross, we have Edward Plantagenet, who was Richard's son. If we go back here, we can see Edward over here is the son of Richard. Well, is he really? He doesn't look very much like the other Plantagenets. You can see that the Plantagenets all had very fine features, very long, straight noses. And even Edward's younger brother, Richard, who later took power over when Edward died, said that Edward was a bastard. And there's something to say for that Edward may have been born out of infidelity on their mother's behalf, on Cecily's infidelity. We don't actually know, but there's a compelling case. At least Edward was big. He was a giant of a man. Even at 19-year-old, he towered over everyone else. He was like a head taller than everyone around him. So he was very, very visible on the battlefield. And later on, he was also known for wearing gilded armor. So not only was he like very big, he would also wear livery and gilded armor, so everyone knew that it was him. And people would simply, like the Lancastrian archers, would compete at trying to bring him down. But he was a warrior to the bone, and he was very, very difficult. And I don't believe that he ever lost any battle. So he is one of the commanders. In 1461, he is 19 years old, has just lost his father, and he has to convince old, grizzled veterans that he is the one to bet on, which he does by convincing them that the perihelion, the three suns that rose in the morning, was a sign from God. And then he fought like the devil himself, which, won the respect of most of his men, I think, and also of his fellow commanders, older, grizzled veterans who had already fought a couple of battles and who knew what they were about, and who now bow down to a 19-year-old boy. His opponent was Jasper Tudor. Jasper was the half-brother of King Henry V. If I go back, you can see here that Henry's mother was Catherine of Valois, so a French princess. And when Henry's father, Henry V, died, Catherine sort of accidentally married a page boy at the court, Henry's page, Owen Tudor. And so Owen's children, Jasper and Edmund, all sort of came from that marriage. That was a secret marriage and was actually outlawed, and it was a big scandal at the time. But, I mean, the Tudor brothers, Jasper and Edmund, were the king's half-brothers by his mother, right? So Jasper Tudor was immensely invested in Henry's cause and in securing Henry as a person, because Henry was had given him and his brother positions at court. He had officially recognized them as his brothers. He had made Jasper the Earl of Pembroke, the most important nobleman in Wales. So they had benefited immensely from Henry's rule, and they stood to lose quite a lot if the Yorkists took over. So why on earth fight at a little nowhere, a road intersection in Hertfordshire in the 2nd of February, like you're moving in winter, which is something that almost never happened in medieval warfare. And they even fought a pitched battle, which is something that almost never happened in medieval warfare. Why did they do it? Well, we don't actually know. There's a lot of things we don't know. We don't know which route the armies took to get there. And we don't actually quite know why they took that route as well. But we know some things. We know that the battle sort of took place at Mortimer's Cross, which is why it's named like this. But we don't actually know exactly where at Mortimer's Cross. The archaeologists haven't found the actual battlefield yet. We know that the Lancastrians had set up camp at or around Pembroke in Wales, where the red rose is on this map. And we know that that Edward and his supporters, the Herberts, and William Herbert's father-in-law, Walter Devereux, both of them York supporters who had just lost their main leader, they all set up around Gloucester in Hertfordshire. So the armies, we know where they were. Now, how did they get to Mortimer's Cross? Because what the Lancastrians wanted at this point, they had received news that Margaret's army in the north had killed Richard of York in an ambush near Wakefield, near his castle of Sandal in the north. And now they were moving that army down south. It was an army of Yorkshiremen and Northerners, and they were moving slowly down towards central England. What they wanted to do here was they wanted to swipe aside the main York army under the Earl of Warwick, the Kingmaker, who still had possession of Henry the Sixth. Like, he still had the king. They wanted to sweep that aside, maybe grab the king, and then march on London and take control of the country. So the Tudors, Jasper and his father Owen, were not well placed for this campaign, right? They were in Wales, in Pembroke. So what I think, and what a lot of other people think, is that they tried to maneuver to get into and join the campaign in the central England. I think they wanted to join up with Margaret's army of Northerners. And in order to do that, there was two options. They could either move along the sea down towards Cardiff and then onward to Gloucester, where they would possibly have to besiege Edward's forces in Gloucester, or at least, catch him there or move past him and then into central England. Or they could move north, taking a route, and I don't even believe is there anymore, towards the crossing points of the rivers that make up the border between Wales and England. And there's one in particular called the Lug, a river, which is exactly where, that at the crossing point, at a bridge on the Lug, that is where Mortimer's Cross is. So that is what I believe. I believe that Jasper and Owen Tudor took the northern route and moved towards England in order to flank around and hopefully slip out of Wales before Edward's forces could do anything. And I think that Edward, why he moved north to Mortimer's Cross, is to block that maneuver. It does not make a lot of sense to me if the Tudors moved along the southern route and then and then Edward sort of abandoned his stronghold of Gloucester and moved north with them in pursuit until they came to that crossing point. You may argue with me, but I don't think that is very likely. So I think that the battle took place because Edward had moved up and tried to block a maneuver from the Tudors that was trying to join the main campaign in England. At least we know that the battlefield is here at Mortimer's Cross, on the border between Wales and England. If we look at maps of the battlefield itself, they are very much split between what people believe happened. Here we have a map of Mortimer's Cross that say that the battle took place in a north-south fashion, that Pembroke and Tudor, the Tudor army, moved up along the old Roman road from Gloucester and Hertford, and then engaged the Yorkist Edward's battle in a north-south fashion. Or we can go with the one I believe is more likely, that the Tudor army moved from the west, came down from the hills and towards the Lug, towards the crossing at the River Lug, and there encountered Edward, which had moved up to block them from maneuvering out of Wales. So what happened there at that battle? We know very, very little. We know that the battle was joined. We know that they fought, and we know that Edward won. But there are no contemporary accounts of what happened. We think perhaps there are a couple of legends around this battle. One of them, of course, being the perihelion and Edward's response of convincing his men that it was a sign of the Holy Trinity, and therefore a good sign for them. But the other thing that we have a legend about is that one of the wards of Edward's army, Walter Devereux's men, was new. They were levies, and they broke under pressure from the Earl of Wiltshire's, James Butler's, more experienced French and Irish mercenaries. But at the same time as the Yorkist flank was breaking, Owen Tudor's flank also broke, as Herbert, Black William Herbert, broke his army, and possibly Owen had attempted something very foolish. He had maybe attempted a flanking maneuver, which potentially went wrong. And here on this in this image by Graham Turner, we can see the Herbert flag flying over the Yorkshire soldiers as they cut into the Lancastrian flank here, Owen Tudor's flank. We know that Edward and the Yorkists won. We know that after the battle, Owen Tudor, along with several other noblemen, were taken captive in a nearby village where they had fled. And we know that the Yorkists executed Owen Tudor and a couple of the other nobles in retaliation for the execution or the murder of the Yorkist commanders at Wakefield. This marks sort of a turning point in the War of the Roses, where commanders would expect to be killed after a battle if they lost. James Butler, the Earl of Wiltshire, who had commanded the mercenaries, ran as well, and it is rumored that his mercenaries simply sat down and waited because, no one was going to pay them to fight if their commander had run away, so they just sat down and waited to see what would happen. Jasper also managed to escape, and Edward turned his army around and marched into central England, and that is the campaign of 1461, which ends at the Battle of Towton, which made him king. So that is my retelling of the actual battle. Next time I'll tell you all about how I intend to refight Mortimer's Cross, and then there'll be a couple of videos of me and my buddies fighting the Battle of Mortimer's Cross. Cheers! See you next time.